Good morning, everyone. I'm Joaquim Garrabou, working at the Institute de Ciències del Mar in Barcelona. And thank you very much for joining us in the 2022 webinar series, Mediterranean MPAs Facing Climate Change. In today's second webinar, we will continue focusing on assessing climate change vulnerability in the Mediterranean MPAs. And today, we welcome more than 100 registered participants from many countries around the Mediterranean and other parts of the world. And I just wanted to highlight that this webinar is organized by the MPA Engage project in association with two other projects, the MPA Networks and the AMAre Plus projects. All these projects have been funded by the Interreg-Med program, which is a European cooperation program funding projects to look for this cooperation across the different regions in the Mediterranean. The main goal of the MPA Engage is to promote the resilience of Mediterranean marine ecosystems faced to climate change by developing a full toolbox for MPA managers. The focus is in enhancing the management capacities of the marine protected areas, and this toolbox is intended to be used across the Mediterranean MPAs and beyond. So we are trying to develop tools that we test during the project, and now we are sharing with all of you. Before I start the webinar, just some technicalities for this webinar. You know that this webinar will be recorded and posted in the YouTube channel afterwards, so you can review the contents of the webinar or sharing with your contacts if you like. During the presentation, that it's going to be about 60 minutes presentation, there will be a time after the presentations for questions. And the way to post the questions is through the chat box in the YouTube channel that you have. And then we will be taking those questions. And you can as well, if you wish, to share your impressions about the webinars using the hashtag that it's here, MPA webinars, that it's posted in the slide. So in this webinar module, we will be explaining how to assess the vulnerability to the impacts of climate change in Mediterranean MPAs. And within this learning unit, participants will get familiar with the methodology developed in MPA Engage project to assess the vulnerability of Mediterranean MPAs in relation to climate change stressors and other potential stressors that are affecting the MPAs. The webinars, yesterday we had this first webinar illustrating the methodology, what is the framework of the methodology, and how important is the data collection and the process to get the final index. So how we are calculating this index of vulnerability. And today we will be more focusing on the explaining how all these tools that we develop have been implemented in the MPA project, and specifically we will be presenting you a tool that has been tested and support the MPA managers on how to use the information that the vulnerability assessments is producing. Today, panelists are Francesca, Barazzetta, and Juan Bueno, Pardo, like yesterday, and I'm going to to give them the floor to present themselves. Good morning, Juan. Good morning, Francesca.
Hello. Good morning.
Kim.
So, Juan? Okay. Yes. Thank you, Kim, for inviting us for this webinar. We will continue with the work we started yesterday. Just a little some words about my background. As I said yesterday, I am a marine biologist. I did my PhD in the Spanish Institute of Oceanography and in the University of Vigo. My background is on theoretical ecology, but I have, in the last times, I have been working in other issues, in other topics more related to fisheries, and more recently in vulnerability assessments and risk assessment, basically.
Thank you, Juan. Good morning, Francesca.
Good morning, Kim. So I will just introduce briefly myself as well. I have a background in natural science, and I have a master in climate change from the University of Copenhagen. My interest of research is in understanding the human-nature interactions in relation to climate change. Currently, with Juan, I'm working at the Future Oceans Lab at the University of Vigo in Spain. And specifically, I'm working and participating at the MPA Engage project, where I'm helping in implementing the guideline for the socio-ecological vulnerability assessment to assess the impacts of climate change in marine protected areas at the Mediterranean level.
Thank you very much. So today, the presentation, we will start by Juan, and then Francesca is going to finalize. And then remember that you have the possibility to post your questions in the chat. So Juan, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Okay. Let me share my screen now. Okay, I think you can see it now. Okay. So let's continue with the webinar that we started yesterday. Today we are going to pass through these steps. We will first make a little recapitulation about what we saw yesterday. Then we will see how to deal with the different indicators, but more in detail, as we did yesterday, more in a general perspective. Today we are going to see how we really operationalize the indicators, how we really do that more in detail. And also we will say some words about climate change scenarios, which are quite interesting to introduce this into your vulnerability assessment. Then we will see how the assessment tool that we have been developed in the framework of Future Mares works, and how are the inputs and outputs that we need to include or that we can expect from it. And finally, we will see some information that is provided by the results and what we get in the end, right? So coming back to what we said yesterday, so we are talking about a socio-ecological climate vulnerability assessment, is what we used to say. The acronym is CVA, no? And this is the methodology we are following here is the one provided by the IPCC in 2004. Just to make clear that there are other kinds of approaches similar, but slightly different. So, for example, risk assessments is another approach also developed by the IPCC more recently than this one. But just to make clear that there are different approaches to the topic, right? So, yeah, we are talking about social ecological vulnerability, which so we have like two fields here: the social aspects and the ecological aspects of our system, that we need to combine them. We will see in the next slide how we do that. We saw that also yesterday. So this approach, this methodology is based on indicators. So we are not modeling. This is not about models, but then afterwards, after you obtain some results, you can play with the results, and sometimes you can try to find relationships between them or between other environmental variables to see how you can where are the main tricky points in your vulnerability assessment. But this is not like the principal goal of this approach. This is based on indicators that we developed to estimate different aspects of our system. And these indicators are aggregated in the end in different steps, but the final ones are what we call the dimensions of vulnerability, which are exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And we combine them, as you see down here, we combine them in this way to obtain the final vulnerability of our system. Just a little word on how we combine the ecological system and the social system. To do that, we follow the methodology developed by Sinner in this in this paper here, Synergy and collaborators in 2013, where the social system, so the exposure of the social system equals the vulnerability of the entire ecological part. So the exposure of the social is the vulnerability of the ecological part. And we do this in this way in MPA Engage. There can be other ways to do that, but this is the most accepted and the most used way to incorporate both aspects in the literature so far. Yep. So just a little glimpse of the steps we need to conduct the vulnerability assessment. First, we need to define the units of analysis. Those can be different species, different habitats, social groups, can be also ecosystem services, can be many things. Then we need to define the indicators. Yesterday, we talked about what is a good indicator, what are the different criteria that we need to meet to have good indicators. Then, of course, we need to gather the data that we need to fill the indicators, and this can be from the sources of information are very variable, from primary to secondary data collections to expert elicitation. Stakeholder consultation is also very used in these type of approaches. Once we have the data, we need always to normalize or standardize our indicators. The usual range is between 0 and 1. We also talked about this in detail yesterday. Then we need to aggregate the indicators to construct the indices, the factors, and then the dimensions, as I just said before, aggregating them, yeah. And in the end, we need to combine the dimensions to obtain the overall vulnerability value of our system. First of the ecological part, then the social part, grouping all the parts of our system, as I said before. The takeaway messages yesterday were that social ecological vulnerability assessments are tools, so that we use to evaluate the vulnerability of a given system and the different parts of it. So we can analyze the vulnerability of our ecological system, but we also will have in the end an assessment of the vulnerability of the different parts. So the different species, each of them will have a vulnerability index in the end, etc. The habitats the same, social groups the same. This kind of frameworks can be adapted to many different contexts, socio-political and climate change scenarios, etc. These tools are good to provide information or foundations about how to implement different adaptation strategies, and we can define different contexts, different focus units, and climate impacts. You can define and understand better what are those. Okay, so let's go. I wanted to say a word about climate scenarios because we didn't talk about this yesterday, and this is very useful. Usually, when we carry out a vulnerability assessment, of course, we are talking about the present, what of the parts of our systems are more vulnerable, but we need to take into account what is going to happen in the future to understand how the climate change is going to affect them. So, and this is why climate change scenarios exist. They are provided by the IPCC with the purpose to homogenize how the different research groups work with climate change. So so in this way, they play always with the same rules or with the same hypothesis. And this is important in vulnerability assessments because, of course, when we talk about species, for example, we know that some of them are more resilient to a given increase of temperature, but can be not so resilient to an increase in ocean acidification, for example. So we need to know what are we talking about, what are the exactly hypotheses we are talking about, and that's why the climate change scenarios exist. the most usual ones to play with are the RCP scenarios provided by the IPCC, 4.5, 8.5, 2.6 as well. In MPA Engage, we consider the three of them. And also, we consider 2 time slices to estimate the vulnerability, because it's not the same when you talk about the near future. When you talk about vulnerability, you can, for example, estimate that your species of interest is going to resist the temperature increase expected to happen by 2020. But probably when you talk about the more far future, then the consequences of climate change probably are going to be maybe, I mean, it's just an example, no, but probably they are going to be harder for your species. And in this case, you need to increase the expected vulnerability when you talk about the future, depending on the time slice you're talking about, right? Just a small to show what are the different the main RCP scenarios that we talk about. Probably most of the audience know what I am talking about. So we have these three are the most usual. The RCP 8.5 is the hardest one. So assuming highest concentration of greenhouse gas in the atmosphere, in consequence, a higher increase of temperature. By the end of this century, we could be talking about an increase of more than 3 degrees Celsius. Unfortunately, this is the scenario that we are following right now. So things don't look very nice, I think. In the framework of future mares, there has been a modeling experiment to provide information, specific information about different environmental hazards that have been carried out at the marine protected area scale. No, in this case, I am showing here the number of marine heat waves expected to happen in the different MPAs. So this kind of information is very useful for vulnerability assessments. You need to include these kind of things, as we will see later. As in your exposure, we will see that you include these things in your exposure. Basically, what you can see here is that probably the MPAs at the eastern of the Mediterranean are going to suffer more when talking about marine heat waves. Well, because in the Eastern Mediterranean, probably conditions are going to worsen faster than in the Eastern. Well, these are model projections related to RCP 8.5. This kind of information is useful for our, for vulnerability assessments. So how we include the information of the climate change scenarios in our vulnerability assessments? We do that. I made already a little spoiler. We do that through the exposure dimension of our system. So in this case, we will have three different versions of the climate change, of the climate variables. Sorry, we will have three versions of temperature increase, three versions of the frequency of marine heat waves, or any other variable that you want to include in the exposure of your vulnerability assessment. Actually, we will have 6 versions, because for each of these scenarios, we will have 2 time slices. So we will have 6 in the end. Well, I wanted to this is a little thing I wanted to comment, because in MPA Engage we had a group, physicals and environmental group, working on the projections. So they had models, environmental models, where to run how it's going to be at the scale of the MPA. Someone interested in conducting a vulnerability assessment, you can gather data on the environmental variables and the projections from the internet. There are some good portals providing this information, and like this one, no? Like the Copernicus is a climate data store, which I recommend, strongly recommend, because it's very good. You can download there lots of information, maps, net CDF in different formats. So it's good. This is the link. If anyone is interested in exploring this link, is a very nice one. So I mean, if you don't have access to specific models, environmental models for the projections, you can always have a look here. It's a nice one. And then I wanted also to highlight this one. This is more for visualization, but also you can download interesting projections. This one is provided by the IPCC. It's an interactive atlas with lots of information. It's very visual, this one, so you can play a little with it and with many regions of the world, if not all of them. And you can zoom a lot in them. So I invite the audience, if it's interested, to explore these resources. Okay. So now we will focus a little now on what has been done more in the framework of MPA Engage. This can serve as an example for if someone is interested in applying a similar approach, or so when we talk about one of the initial things that you need to do when you start a vulnerability assessment is defining your units of analysis. So, and they can be of different types. You can play with species, you can play with habitats or users or social groups. You also need to consider different stressors. In MPA Engage, climate change stressors, sorry. In MPA Engage, we focused on those ones in sea surface temperature and marine heat waves. This is not closed. I mean, you can include more, no? But this is what we have done in MPA Engage, and with the habitats we consider some like these ones here, the Posidonia oceanica meadows, other seagrass meadows, and different habitats on the infralittoral rocky bottoms, etc. Species, we consider different fish with different echinoderms, bivalves also, and different users of the MPA, which compound the social part of it. No, so commercial fishers, recreational fishers. The diving sector is also important in some of our MPAs. Activities related to boats, related to tourism, related to like seabird, bird watching, sorry, marine bird watching, like for example, things like that. No, you can include them to also include the impact of these activities in your system. Yeah, well, the information to fulfill this the indicators related to these units it sometimes come from citizen science or stakeholder engagement or other areas. Francesca will talk more about this, but she will show you better the tool that has been developed. So I'm not going to talk in detail about this now, just to tell you that a tool, an online tool exists, which is it's not very interactive right now. It will improve these aspects in the near future. But anyway, she will show you, so no spoilers now. Talking about how we operationalize the tool, we need the inputs to the tool that we have developed in MPA Engage are Excel templates, where you need to include, first of all, the exposure data here, coming from wherever is the source of information. You need to fill some Excel templates that you upload here. But here you see very in a fast way that the input is about data templates based on Excel or CSV. And then you will get the outputs, which is a report that the tool is doing automatically, and also some, well, of course, the figures and all this. But the tool that we have developed is providing you a complete report with the figures and texts, and it's quite nice. The guys have done a very nice job there. About the templates more specifically, the Excels consider 6 sheets, so 1 per scenario of climate change and year. So that's the 6 versions that I mentioned before. And each template should consist of 7 columns dedicated to the habitats, the species, the user groups, the indicators, their value, the level of confidence, and quantitative. Quantitative meaning is just a yes, no column indicating if this is a qualitative or quantitative indicator. This is needed for the process, for the code to understand what kind of information we are giving. And now I would like to just give you a little idea of the indicators, specific indicators we have used in MPA Engage. We have many. Francesca yesterday said the number. I think is something close to 70, 80. I don't know, but I can't go one by one. But I think that if I explain some of them, you will understand the idea better, and you will understand also, I hope, how we include the information in the Excels. So when we talk about exposure of the ecological part, remember that the exposure of the social part is the entire vulnerability of the ecological one. So when we talk about exposure, we deal with 2 indicators related to sea surface temperature increase and marine heat waves. These are quite straightforward. So we got the data and we introduce the data in the templates. That's it. No, there are no many things we can do there. But then we have the other kind of indicators that they are more tricky, or there are different ways to estimate the value, as we were trying to explain also yesterday, but today we go more into detail. So related to the ecological sensitivity, we have considered all this, probably even more. I tried to put here the most relevant or nice to show. For example, all of them have, as I define here in this blue circle, I try to show you, give a glimpse of what is the indicator about, what are we trying to measure. So all of these indicators have this. This is the typical thing that you want to include in your supplementary information when you write a paper on vulnerability assessments. You include all this part in there, because the amount of information you need to provide sometimes is heavy. And so yeah, so the coastal population density, for example, is one of the indicators where we try to measure the density of people living in the adjacent area of the MPAs. Okay, and you say, okay, but how should I include this in the tool? You could include the number, but then if you include the number, how could you normalize this, or how could you make an interpretation of this? So in these cases, we try to create a criteria to make a categorical indicator with this information. And this is what I am showing down here in purple. Like, for example, very low. The density of people living in the adjacent areas of the MPA is lower than 350 inhabitants per kilometer square. These kind of things. This is how we operationalize the indicators to include them in the template. The same here in this case for the ecological adaptive capacity. These are the tricky ones because their sign used to be reversal, used to be negative. We talked about this yesterday. We consider things such as the MPA shape, the habitat diversity, the habitat complexity within the MPAs, the habitat monitoring protocols, if they exist or not. All these things are characteristics of your MPA that that improve the adaptive capacity to the climate change impact that we are assessing. Just an example, as before, species habitat specificity. Here we try, for example, to understand the recovery potential of the species based on its habitat restriction. So in these cases, habitat generalist species are more adaptable, are more resilient. So probably this indicator is in this sense. No, if we have more generalists or specialists species, is taking different values. When you see only one indicator, probably it's not telling you much about what are you measuring. But when you combine all of them, then you start to see a picture, and you end up understanding better where are the characteristics of your habitat or whatever you're measuring, where the vulnerability increases more. The same thing in this case for social sensitivity. So for social indicators are sometimes more at least for me, that I am a biologist, but for me they are a bit more difficult to find sometimes. And yeah, so we have things like the port access, port mooring fees, number of companies, number of working days that the workers are at sea or at their place of work, whatever it is. The users numbers, for example, in this case, we are trying to measure here the average number of users of the sector visiting the MPA per year. So this is like a measure of the impact of the tourists, of the users in general. If we use the term users, we refer to a broader group of people. And in this case, because we have different users in our MPAs, we define different criteria depending on the sector or on the sector of the users. There are more. We have like fishing, tourism, fishing sector, but I just included here the diving and the tourist, for example. So we have here the criteria, no? And these criteria need to be based on, many times you need to ask the stakeholders, the local stakeholders who know very well the functioning of your MPA and your ecosystem and the social aspects, no? So probably they are your best options when trying to define these criteria. Finally, the social adaptive capacity. We consider other different aspects, such as the access to justice, the income of the fishers, or income of any other social groups. This is a typical one. Participation in decision making. This is the one that I put as an example here. So we are trying here to measure the level at which the users participate in the decision making of the MPA management. And we are assuming that, for example, a passive participation implies that the users are not a part of the decision making process. And in this case, this group should have, or we assume that they have a lower adaptive capacity because they are less integrated in the system, and probably their opinion or their needs are not considered during the management procedure. So yeah, this now I will pass the floor to Francesca. Thank you for listening. She will go more in detail on the functioning of the tool and things like that. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. So now I will start my presentation. Okay, so thank you very much, Juan, for your presentation. And now, as Juan already introduced briefly, I want to dig a little bit more with you into the tool that we have developed in the MPA Engage project. So what we developed is, as he already said, is a standardized and user-friendly tool. And we decided to do it like that in order to facilitate the calculation and the visualization of the final results for managers and the users. So the tool is online on a website, and it is easily accessible. The figure that you see here is the intro page, and we included a map figure with the pilot MPAs that participated in the project. So now we know the process that we have done so far. So selecting the specific indicators, do the data collection, how to extrapolate specific exposure data, and so on. But how do we include these data that we have collected into the tool to calculate the final results? So basically, as Juan spoiled, we have created an Excel sheet. This Excel is made of 6 different panels, 6 sheets, one for each scenario. We know that we included 3 different RCPs, which are the 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5, and we calculated the projection for 2 years, which are 2050 and the 2100. So the Excel will be filled out for each of the RCP and for each year that we are considering in the assessment. So from each of the sheet, we will have calculated by the tool different outputs. Okay. It is very important to stress that we have different columns that form the Excel. We have the first column, which is the habitat, and where we will include the specific names of the habitats that we want to include. Then we have the species column, where we include the species, the professional fisher one, the recreational activities column, the indicator, and here for a matter of space and facilitation, we include the code of the code name of the indicator, then the value to measure the indicator, the level of confidence that Juan nicely explained yesterday what it is, and the quantitative or qualitative data. I wanted to zoom in on the column because they are very important to fill in when we use the tool in order for the application to run it properly, to specifically focus on the different columns that design the Excel. So now I'm going to provide an example on how to fill in the questionnaire, the Excel that we have developed. So first of all, when we want to assess specific habitats or species or users, we need for each indicator to add as many lines as the number of habitat or species that we want to assess. In this case, we are focusing on the indicator HBCOM that I will describe more in the next slide, and specifically focus on measuring a characteristic of habitats. So in this example, we want to measure 5 habitats. So we will need to measure this indicator as many times as the number of habitats that we have. In this case, we are measuring 5 habitats, so we will evaluating this indicator 5 times. The same process needs to be repeated for the different indicators according to the number of habitat or species that we want to measure. There are some indicators that are not related, of course, to any habitat, species, or users, but are focusing on assessing the vulnerability of the MPA. In this case, this indicator we will only be measured 1, and nothing will appear in the column of habitat of species or users. But we will see this more in an example in the next slides. So once we have completed this first part of we know which indicator we want to measure and which habitats, we include the value. So we include the value to measure the indicator. The indicators can be measured in categorical values. So with, for example, indicators measuring on a high, medium, low scale or on a 1, 2, 3, or they can measure numerically. They can be measured numerically. Here we have a first example. So the HBComp corresponds to the indicator of habitat complexity. And the habitat complexity evaluates the level of complexity of each habitat present in the MPA, according to the number of habitats that each MPA wants to evaluate. And it's evaluated using a qualitative scale based on an expert assessment, which was done by a questionnaire. Specifically, if we focus on the coralligenous habitat, it is measured on a low, medium, high scale, where low complexity corresponds to consisting on encrusting or small-sized organism of below 1 centimeter of dimension. The medium complexity corresponds to organism characterized by a growth in moderate height from 1 to 10 centimeters. And then we have a high complexity, composed of massive or arborescent individuals with appreciable height growth of more than 10 centimeters. In this specific case, in this example, we see that the value to the coralligenous is high, and this was evaluated by the experts in the questionnaire that we have performed with them. Another example could be with the Posidonia. The Posidonia is complexity is measured differently. We have the low complexity that corresponds to there are small patches of green meadows, but without any matter formation. The medium complexity corresponds to the area, presents patches of green meadows and network of matter are visible. Then we have the high complexity, where the area presents dense and continuous green meadows with or without matter. And in this case, we see again that the Posidonia has a high level of complexity, and again was assessed by the experts that we interacted with in order to assess this value. Another example, and here is the example that I was explaining before, where these, for example, the presence of endangered species is an indicator that focuses on the totality of the MPA. It's not focusing specifically on any habitat or species or users. So you see that these columns are empty, and there is only one line to measure the indicator. In this case, the presence of endangered species corresponds to the number of endangered and threatened species present in the MPA based on the IUCN, SPAMI, and Habitat Directive Annex 4 list. The indicator is measured numerically, and then it was transformed to a categorical value. And the low category corresponds to the number of endangered species is below 16. The medium is between 16 and 48. And the high is between 48 and 81, and very high, more than 81. The value we see here is medium, not probably, but because the value of the number of endangered species in this specific MPA was between 16 and 48, and then was transformed into the categorical value. Here, since we provided only 2 examples, we included a link to the document where you can see how the different indicators have been evaluated, all the indicators, how they are measured, and if they are measured in a categorical way, in the numerical, or if a numerical value is transformed into categorical, so that you can understand how to fill in the table. When completing and filling in the Excel, we suggested to gather all the information from questionnaires, from the literature, from reports, from your databases in one unique document, so that it's more neat, and you have all the data in the same document when filling in the Excel sheet. Not, for example, that in order to complete the habitat complexity, since we ask this information through a questionnaire, we need to go to look into the questionnaire to have this information, or if a specific data comes from a report, we need to look for the report. So we suggest to do these two is the whole process of data collection and filling in the template. So the next column is the level of confidence. And the level of confidence was very well explained by Juan yesterday, and evaluates the confidence of the data with a value going from 1 to 5. And in this case, for the habitat complexity, The value was evaluated through a questionnaire to MPA managers, and the level of confidence in this specific case was 3. And this is because it was performed to a small sample of experts that provided a unitless information, but whose answer has a high level of agreement. Another example could be on another indicator, which corresponds to habitat extension, and it's measured numerically. The information comes from the MPA databases, specifically on the maps, on the cartography maps, and we have a level of confidence on 5. And this is related to the fact that the data comes from a very reliable source to local documentation reports, in this case from the cartography map that the MPA has available to evaluate the size of the different habitats inside their MPA. Here again, we provided the document. To ease the example, I only included the specific sentences that explain why we give this level of confidence to these specific indicators. However, if you want to understand more and the full concept behind the level of confidence that we given to explaining what is the description of level of confidence to value 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, you can check in this document that we have shared with you. So the next and the last column is the quantitative column. And we can either add a value of 0 or 1. And this value depends if the indicator measured, it was measured qualitative or quantitative. So if the data is categorical, we add a 0. If the data is numerical, we add a 1. And this is very important because the code that runs behind the tool reads this information when completing the final calculation to calculate the final indices. And here I provide another example where, for example, the habitat complexity for the Posidonia oceanica in this case, but for all the all habitats, habitat complexity is measured in a categorical way, so we add the value 0. On the contrary, the presence of endangered species was measured numerically, so we added the value 1, even though it was then transformed into a categorical scale. So now that we gave an example and we are more familiar on how to fill in the template to run the tool, we will dig more into how the tool works, what are the outputs that we can expect from the tool, the figures, and I'm going to show you examples of outputs in the next slides. However, first let's remind that the output tool are going to be different results for each RCP considered, which are the 2.6, 4.5, and 8.5, so for the year 2050 and 2100. And specifically, the tool provide the results of socio-ecological vulnerability, ecological vulnerability, species vulnerability, habitat vulnerability, and user vulnerability. Now we will move to the first example of index that the tool provides. So the first one is the socio-ecological vulnerability, and as you are probably more familiar right now, it evaluates the vulnerability of the total MPA, considering both the ecological and social dimension. And when we calculated this index, the tool considers all the indicators that have been included in the assessment and have been measured. And specifically here, we are seeing the final output and the final result for the RCP 2.6 2050. You see that we don't have numbers, but we're using categorical values. In fact, traditionally in vulnerability assessment, numerical values are converted into qualitative categories for better communication and visualization in the results. So for this, we have decided to use the same approach, to keep the same approach as it is done with generally with vulnerability assessment, to ease the process for the managers when reading and analyzing the final results, to sharing them with the local stakeholders, and also to ease the comparison of results between different MPAs. So here we see that there is the figure is on a donut, where we see the vulnerability, the final vulnerability value in the middle, and the donut's parts are composed by the different dimension of vulnerability corresponding to exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. And the colors refer to the category. So we have, for example, in this specific case, a moderate exposure, extreme sensitivity, and a very high adaptive capacity. And we need to remind that this is specific for one RCP and year, and this same figure and result will be provided for the 6 scenarios assessed. Another information that the tool provides is the data coverage. The data coverage refers to the number of indicators or percentage of number of indicators for each dimension that was covered. So, for example, the exposure dimension in this case is the one that has the highest percentage of indicators evaluated. The sensitivity is the one with the lowest number. And so here we can start to have a first information on the amount of data that we are lacking in our vulnerability assessment and which dimension is lacking the most. Then we have the data confidence. The data confidence, we know that has a value between 1 and 5, and we have a data confidence for value for each dimension considered. Specifically, the value refers to the average of the level of confidence value for each indicators measured in this dimension. Meaning that, for example, we have a data confidence of adaptive capacity of 2.1, and this means that the average of the level of confidence of all indicators measured for the adaptive capacity corresponds to 2.1. Another information provided is the indicators that contribute the most to the vulnerability. And this is divided in social contribution and ecological contribution. So there are specific indicators of exposure, sensitivity, and adaptive capacity. We thought it was relevant information for managers to have, because knowing which are the indicators that contribute the most to the vulnerability of the marine protected area could provide relevant information to implement actions to decrease the vulnerability of the area itself. Then the second example is an example of the result of the ecological vulnerability. The ecological vulnerability considers only, in the result, consider only the ecological dimension of the assessment, and hence only including indicators belonging to this dimension. The structure is the same as the socio-ecological vulnerability, is a donut with the 3 dimensions of vulnerability, and in the middle we have the final value of vulnerability, in this case high. Again, we provide the level of data coverage for this specific for this specific index, and the data confidence. I want to stress that the values of data confidence here are higher compared to the index before. And this is because many times ecological indicators, data to measure the ecological indicators come from models and from the reports, literature review, so their level of confidence is higher many times compared to social indicators. And now we move to the subunits of the assessment. The first one is the species. The species vulnerability evaluates the vulnerability of the species selected by the managers to perform the assessment. And these indices only consider the specific indicators that only focus on species. Between 14 or 15 and 24 species have been assessed by the different MPAs. In the figure, for a matter of the plot, we include only the first 10 species with the highest that perform or display the highest vulnerability. In this case, we see that the vulnerability goes from very high from high to very high, and we're focusing on the RCP 4.5 for the year 2100. For the species and in the index, and you see also in the next ones, we don't have donuts anymore, but we have the bar chart. And this is due to the kind of figure that, since we have like multiple indices to show in the same figure. The next index calculated is the habitat vulnerability. Again, the habitat vulnerability evaluates the vulnerability of the habitats that are selected by the managers of the MPA. And it only considers the indicators that focus specifically on habitats. In this specific figure, the 5 habitats are assessed. However, we have other cases where less habitats were assessed, either because a specific habitat was not present in the marine protected area or for other reason. And here we see that the vulnerability is mainly moderate and only high in one marine protected area, in one habitat. And finally, we move to the last index, which is the user vulnerability. The user vulnerability evaluates the vulnerability of users that are selected by the managers. And again, as the previous one, it only focuses on the indicators that focus on users. In this case, again, we have the 5 users that were assessed. However, there are also cases where less users were assessed in the assessment. And this is because, for example, professional fishers sometimes are not allowed to practice their activity in marine protected areas, and the same could be for recreational fishers. Now I would like to dig more with you and explore a little bit the tool. So let's click on the link, and here we see this is the web page that we have created, so it's very easily accessible. It's on the web. This is the introduction of the tool, provides an introduction specifically focusing on the MPA Engage, which is, as Kim introduced to us, in InterregMed project, explaining who contributed in the development. And here we have a map pointing out the partner MPAs that contributed in the development and the testing phase of the vulnerability assessment. And a little bit below, we describe which kind of RCPs, as Juan explained, were used, the projections, and what kind of exposure indicators were used. Here on the top part of the website, we see the tabs with the different different indices that are calculated by the tool. So the first one is the socio-ecological vulnerability index, and here are the plots that I already described to you in the presentation. And if we click on this bottom, this bottom, we see a more specific description, for example, of the different graphs that are shown in the tool. Then we see another box that we can click, and here we have specific details about the indicators that are included in the assessment, their full name, and to which dimension they belong to. This could be useful and ease the process for you to understand which indicators contribute the most to the vulnerability of the MPA. I need to stress that right now the tool is not fully interactive. As you see, there is a drop-down menu that is repeated in each tab, where only the marine protected area, the partner MPAs are included. However, in the next weeks, the updated version where you can upload the template with the data of your MPA can be included, so that you can calculate the final results of the vulnerability assessment for the specific MPA. Just to provide more information about the tool, here there are the different RCPs that are considered, and here you can download the different information, the plots, the report that Juan was explaining before, or results and contribution. Then we have the ecological value, and the structure is the same as we showed before in the presentation of the results that you can obtain. And also here we have a description of the plots. And the same, we have drop-down menus for the different scenario and different MPAs. Then we have the value for the species, where different species are included. For example, here we have the results for the figure for another MPA, and the same for habitats, and the same for users. Right now, we acknowledge that the tool is not completely interactive, so it's not so useful. However, this part will change, and you can browse in your template, and from there you can calculate the final results and see the figures related to the specific the specific users that you will select, specific species, habitats, and the results for the socio-ecological and ecological vulnerability. So now we can go back to the presentation. Let me see. Okay, perfect. And go to the final slides of this presentation. So now we know what we can calculate with the vulnerability assessment. What are the outputs and results that we can obtain? So I wanted to highlight the information provided by this tool. So first of all, provides information about the data that we have. So the status of the data collection and the monitoring activities that we are performing in the MPA. So we can identify where we lacking of specific data and where we should focus more our attention for future data collection, or where we should improve the quality of our data. It provides information about the main vulnerabilities of the area, supporting relevant information for the implementation of specific and tailored action, provides information about the most vulnerable species, users, and habitats of the assessment. It provides information for adaptation and mitigation strategies. In fact, the data gathered will support relevant information to shape future adaptation and mitigation strategies. So this information will be important to support these specific strategies that could be implemented in support of other information collected through other activities. Then action should be obviously undertaken based on the available information. However, it's also important to advance and strengthen this information and deepen the all associated knowledge related to these aspects. Then I think it's very interesting because the vulnerability assessment can incorporate stakeholder and expert participation into the climate adaptation planning of the MPA. It can highlight the relationship between local stakeholders and the MPA, and what could be improved in this kind of engagement, between the MPA and the stakeholders active in the area. It provides useful information to understand and strengthen identified weaknesses of the area to improve the capacities that are currently existing. And finally, last but not least, it is important, as we also said yesterday, to continue with the data collection to measure the indicator that still have not been measured, but also to increase the quality of the data that have already been collected. So to increase the quality of the assessment over time. And here with this last slide, I will conclude with the takeaway messages that the socio-ecological vulnerability assessment, we can say that it is a useful tool that allows to evaluate the vulnerability of a system. And here specifically, we focused on marine protected areas and the species, habitat, and users that are considered relevant within these systems. Additionally, we can say that the assessment developed gathers data collected from different areas, so from monitoring activities, from managers, from MPA's databases, through stakeholder engagement, managers' knowledge and expertise, and expert elicitation, and the data coming from models and the literature. So combining all these data provides information through the final result that could highlight the weaknesses of the area in order to promote and ease the process of defining the actions that should be taken by managers of the area to decrease the vulnerability of the marine protected areas. So I'm finished with the presentation today, and I thank you all very much for being here with us again.
Thank you very much, Francesca and Juan, for these nice presentations and trying to show how we go from the theoretical framework to the practical way, and how this can help and support increase the management effectiveness of the MPA's phase 2 climate change. So we have already some questions. So by Marina Stenek, that she's asking about the climate projections. So it's true that there is these portals where they deliver these projections, but Marina is asking how we can adapt this to the scales of the marine protected areas, because they are much smaller, and maybe this can be not easy to adapt to those scales. So I don't know, Juan, maybe you can take this question.
Yeah, it's a good point. Thank you, Marina. Well, to be honest, I think in Copernicus or in these platforms where you can get some environmental data, I mean, not all the data and not all the models used there are uniform. So, I mean, I don't know all of them, of course, and the characteristics of all of them. I guess, but I have been working with some that have good resolutions, very few kilometers, for example. And yeah, you can. The downscaling is important, but sometimes when you have good resolution, you get the data from there directly. At least you can have a good idea of the projections and how it's going to be. So, I mean, there are different options and you need to explore the data.
I have a question related to this before going to the other questions. In your experience, what is the expertise that an MPA manager should have to take this data from the portals? I mean, it's something that it's ready to use, so you download the data and you get the information that you will be putting in the spreadsheet, or you need to have some tools to to explore the data. That is can be useful to know, just to
all the data that you find in these portals, first of all, they are always they have besides a very nice description, because they try to explain, no? So they explain how this has been calculated and different aspects, the resolution, I mean everything, the methodology that the models have followed to obtain the projections. And then about the expertise that you need, I mean, as far as you have some basic expertise on R, for example. I have been working with this data with using R, but you can use other different in QGIS or using GIS methods. You can also directly import this data, so you can explore them directly with GIS visualization tools. Or with R, I am more familiar with R, so I directly manipulate the data on R, and I think I mean, it's not a big deal. There are good information in you Google how to play with NetCDF or this kind of data, and you will manage for sure. Well, it's not a big deal.
From what from what you say, it seems that you need a certain level of expertise on managing this, because I don't know if all the MPA managers are familiar with the language R, which is mainly used in. It has many applications, but in science. So just to keep this in mind. We have another question by Marina. It says regarding the categories. Don't you think that categories that will be used for normalization of a specific indicator should be standardized at least at the level of the sea basin, so Mediterranean Sea Basin. I don't know, maybe Francesca, you can take this, or Juan?
Yes, I can take this. So this is actually what we have been doing within the MPA Engage project. Since we are aiming to produce a standardized tool at the Mediterranean level, we are using the, when possible, of course, the indicators that are standardized at the level of the basin. So yeah, it's very important when we want to compare MPAs in the Mediterranean from different areas. So yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, Francesca.
Thank
now
you.
We have another question by Ibrahim Buberki. Wouldn't it be challenging to combine different data used from different sources in the same process? It makes an Excel sheet without a prior standardization. I think that you have been explaining this. So
yeah. So the process. Oh, sorry.
Go. No, I'm not going to answer this.
So yeah, basically the process of the standardization. Once you gather the data and they are just converted when necessary from a numerical to categorical, or you include the high, medium, low value that is necessary to include, the process of the standardization will be automatically done by the tool. So the whole process of standardization won't be needed to be performed by the users, but the tool does it automatically when calculating the finite index.
Yeah, this was important to have this ready to use. I mean, the people, the MPA managers, they have they have to do the effort on collecting the information, putting in the Excel file, and then this tool is providing all the calculations and the process. So I think that's a fantastic tool what you develop during the project. Thank you. So another question by Lucia Millán. Did you use the same indicators for the different MPAs, or did you adapt them in each case?
So I can take this one as well. So the indicators that we used are always the same. However, according to the data that the different MPAs had available in their databases, different indicators have been used in the assessment. But the way the indicators are the same and the way of measuring them is the same. And if you remember the figure of data coverage that I showed in the presentation, the data coverage exactly relates to that, because not all MPAs had all the data available, so not all indicators were measured, and they can know in this way where they're lacking their data. But the indicators are the same.
Okay. Thank you very much. So now we have another comment by Marina Stenek about the colors. I mean, this I was tricky, but she is asking if in the plot of adaptation capacity is shown in red if it is greater value. Shouldn't it be in green to be more intuitive? It should have its own scale. I mean, it's always tricky issues, but I don't know. Why you have a criteria why you use the red for this in this case, or
go
no, I mean, this is related to the negative value of the adaptive capacity. If you see it from the point of view of the vulnerability, higher adaptive capacity means lower vulnerability. So I guess it's a matter of taste, as you prefer the color. I mean, yeah, this can be I think it can be adapted in the code of the tool, but it's just a matter of taste. I guess, no, Francesca, what do you think?
Yeah, no, I agree. Yeah, no, I think it's a pretty, sorry, we are delayed. No, just saying that it's a very fair comment, the one of Marina, because I mean, it depends on how we want to use the colors, right? Because the adaptive capacity is opposite compared to the exposure and sensitivity. So it's a very fair comment. We just decided to go this way, but either option I think are very valuable.
maybe you can, after a while of running and the people is implementing the tool, you can run a poll and asking the people what color they prefer for this category.
We could do
Okay.
that. We actually have a feedback page in the tool. So if people want to, managers or users that are using the tool want to provide feedbacks, that is very, very welcome to keep improving the tool.
Great, that is great. Thank you, Francesca. And we have another comment by Marina about the European Commission should issue the guidelines for with normalization rules for certain sea basins based on your work. I mean, this is what we try to do, right? To provide some harmonizational list of the frameworks for this. But yeah, I don't know if you want to. I think that we are working for this, right? To try to provide a common basis on how to deal with these issues, because the climate change and the global change and the biodiversity loss challenges that we have now, that we are facing now, they act or they have an impact at such a great scales that we need this common understanding, because otherwise it's really difficult to implement or to think for tools. So yeah, so let's try it. We will try to do it, but let's see. I don't see any other question, but maybe I can put one to you if you want to take this about from the MPA point of view. What is the effort that they have to think in putting in if they want to run a vulnerability assessment? So how, more or less, an idea, it's a matter of spending 1 week of full work, or you need 2 months, or you need certain levels of expertise in your staff, or this kind of thing. Just an idea, more or less, because I think that this information can be useful for MPA managers that are now attending the webinar, to have an idea on what are the resources that they have to allocate to this interesting and useful exercise of running the vulnerability assessment.
You answer, Francesca, I think.
Yeah, I can answer that. So basically, all depends on the status of the data collection. So how the amount of data that are available in the MPA database. From our experience, we've seen that the process was a bit easier for marine protected areas that already performed vulnerability assessment, because part of the data collection was already done. And for MPAs that have been in place for a longer time. So this is something that needs to be taken into account as well. So I would say that if a full or a consistent data collection needs to be performed, also including the stakeholders' engagement in the process, about 2 months should be considered, and also it depends on the level of a bit of expertise, because it could be a tricky topic. So according to how familiar the person is with the vulnerability assessment, will also depend a bit the level of engagement. However, we also need to stress that is with this tool, and is a web tool, so it doesn't allow cost in terms of money other than the staff that needs to be involved in the data collection and performing the filling in of the template and running and using the tool to calculate the final results.
Thank you, Francesca. I think that one of the good things of this tool is that the people is a process, right? You can start, and if you don't have the information for all the indicators, it's you can start gathering the information, getting the first results, and then you can focus in the following interaction with the tool with more data and understanding better what you need. And I think that it's triggering a process and guiding the management options faced to the climate change, which I think that it's really important for for this. So maybe just I don't know if there is any other question by the audience or by the participants in the webinar, but maybe just to conclude, if you want to give us from the exercise that you, or the work that you have been conducting in MPA Engage, what are the MPAs that are most vulnerable to climate change according to the results? Just a kind of a summary, just to give, because I think that this is providing as well an information on the application of this tool, which is having the results actually already now. Okay.
Yeah. So what we've seen from the final results is that in general, as we already introduced yesterday, when we use RCPs with the worst case scenarios, the vulnerability is way higher, which is obviously what we can expect. And also the vulnerability assessment results kind of confirm what is said before by Juan and what is already occurring, that the Eastern Mediterranean will experience a higher vulnerability compared, like the MPAs that are found in this area of the basin will experience a higher vulnerability compared to the western side in a matter of time. So this is what we have seen. And about species, we've seen that the species like Pinna nobilis or Corallum rubium will be the one that will be facing a higher vulnerability, or the gorgonians as well, which Kim, based on your expertise, can confirm me that are already in an endangered status currently.
No, they are suffering a lot. Okay, I think that we cover many of the points. So thank you very much, Francesca and Juan, and all the participants for for being here and for your interest in this webinar. And hoping that we fulfill your expectations with these two sessions, which are, we provided really complete information. This is my understanding of this, so and that you can review. We will be sharing the materials, so the presentations, and you have already, we posted the links to the tool, that you will have this as well available, and you can watch again the webinars in there soon. And don't hesitate to contact any of us, Francesca and Juan especially, and Elena Ojea, who is leading the Future Labs in University of Vigo, if you have any comments. And I don't know if Francesca and Juan wants to say something just for closing. Otherwise, I can.
Yes. Thank you for inviting us to share this, and thank you to the audience as well to be here and for the nice questions, interesting questions, and keep in touch.
Yeah. Thank you very much. We hope you enjoyed these two webinars, and we expect you in next weeks for the monitoring webinars as well.
Yeah. So you know that we have this second module of the 2022 webinars on marine protected areas and climate change, which is going to be devoted to the monitoring activities. So there will be 3 sessions starting Monday 4th till the Wednesday 6th of April. And they will be at the same time from 10 to 12. And we will be presenting 9 monitoring protocols covering different aspects of the impacts of the climate change in the Mediterranean. So you have still time to register and spread the word if you think that it's interesting for your contacts. Thank you very much, and see you next week. Bye.
See you.
Bye. Thank you very much. See you.